Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what coast you're on. Thank you for joining us at Academy on Air. My name is Josh. I'm a member on the agency team here at Google headquarters in Mountain View. You picked, honestly, a really great day to join. We're having a conversation about the paradigm shift in advertising from really massive and broad reach to now user-based targeting. I want to tell you a little bit of information today in terms of how to navigate Google's Audience Solutions Suite and really an effective and repetitive framework for you to use in your own execution of that audience suite. I'll be doing a live question and answer at the end of this live stream, so please submit your questions. I'm happy to help out as best I can, and I'm excited for today. So this goes without saying, we are all online. I can't say that this metric is really pertaining to what I do on the weekends. I can probably say I sleep a little bit more on the weekend, but it goes without saying we're all spending an incredible amount of time online. So it's even more important now to be addressing the right people and the moments that matter online. Another really interesting metric. Every day, and this number is just completely mind-blowing. I'm not even going to pretend what this number is, frankly. However, I can tell you that we've created 90% of the world's data in the last 2 years alone. This is incredible. I can actually tell you that this number is actually equivalent to a billion or a million trillion bytes of data. That's incredible. We are creating, we're visiting online, we're purchasing, we're sharing our stories, and it's attributing to this metric. Throughout kind of the progression of Google technology, we've been able to use machine learning, pattern recognition, and AI to really derive useful insights from this data. We can see historical data and leverage whether users are really interested in products or services or truly intend to make a purchase. We also leverage pattern recognitions to identify potential customers that are net new to a business that we may not already be engaging in the past. And that's really the main gist of what I'm trying to communicate today, is that there are really ways that we can utilize Google technology to not only re-engage your existing customer, but reach outside of that to find customers who are relevant to your business. So the shift in advertising is pretty clear over the last, I would say, 3 decades. We've moved from a kind of Mad Men era in mass print advertising to a different era now. Before, we were trying to reach really the broadest applicable audience. This was, as you guys know, an unsegmented approach, relatively speaking. TV was aimed for reach, and it would really target the whole family. The most targeting that we had really came in the forms of, when was that commercial aired? Who did we think was in front of the television or radio at the time that advertisement was showcased? Today, this is clearly not the case, and we've become a little bit smarter from a digital standpoint to try to find, reach, and speak to that person in the moment that matters. So today, and more so, we can now see what the real user is. So not only the demographic profile, so to speak, of the user, but what are they doing online? What are the things that they're actually engaging and interested in? Because that tells a much deeper, much more passionate story than simply the demographic profile of a user. And the brands and the companies that speak best to the real user and the real self are the ones that are winning in today's marketplace. So, as a really interesting example, this young lady named Kara, she's 35, she lives in New York City, she's a patent lawyer that makes quite a bit of money. So, from an ordinary perspective, you would assume a few things based on your business, but what is Kara's real deeper self? What is she passionate about? What is she engaging with online? Because those are the moments that she's going to care about most, and those are the moments that are a real opportunity for businesses to really play. So, Kara, as I said, she's a patent lawyer, but she also plays video games online. Does she play Fortnite? Who knows? She probably does. She watches live esports, and she's a country music lover. So all of these insights are really able to be garnered now and to be leveraged in your campaigns at Google and elsewhere. There's a particular suite of tools within the AdWords front end that allow you to kind of see these things in a bit more detail, and I'll share those with you in a few slides. Audience is key nowadays. 58% of media buys will use high quality audience data by 2020. This is right around the corner. The companies and the corporations that are using this audience data at scale, and number one, creating an infrastructure to capture such high quality data is really going to be key. These are the companies that are winning, and these are the companies that are going to continue to win as the marketplace progresses. So if you're not currently collecting customer data, audience data, if you're not doing any internal evaluation from a lifetime value perspective, the more data the better, because it's going to inform your marketing and media buys appropriately. So look, let's not wait until 2020 to recognize this shift. Let's learn a little bit now how to get this set up, because it's going to put you in a lot better of a position moving forward. And I'm going to give you a really couple actionable things that we can do today to utilize Google's Audience Suite to be set up for success. So everyone is most likely aware of 80 to 90% of the features here in our Audience Suite. Most of these features can be applied to search, can be applied to display, YouTube, and shopping as well. I want to unpack these in a little bit better detail, not one by one, but kind of looking holistically and really understanding what framework we can use to apply all of these technologies, because clearly there's a lot out there to pursue, and we want to be very particular in terms of what we apply. So here's really how to build a comprehensive audience strategy. So number one, we need to identify our audience. There's a lot that we can do subjectively in terms of holding a leadership meeting within your company to say, hey, what really matters to us? Is it customer retention? Is it that net new customer? And what do those people look like? If you're a B2B company, what are the personas that you're going after to try to kind of get that net new business across? So it's very important to identify the audiences that you're looking for. And secondly, maybe supplementing that, I would say, subjective data with data that we can start to provide you within the AdWords front end, which is very, very useful. And I'll touch on that in a second. The second piece is re-engaging the people that we've identified and driven to the website. So re-engagement is crucial. Again, I think it goes without saying that we need to start really touching the user in the moments that matter throughout the customer journey. Someone who comes to the website one time, maybe two times, needs that extra reminder, needs that extra piece of branding to solidify whether it's the brand image or the value proposition that your product or service offers. So it's very, very important to re-engage users throughout the journey with, very important, the right creative and the right message, because we want to speak as finely as possible. Lastly, the expand. Expanding is a great way to fill that funnel up again. So as you'll see in a few slides, this is a very cyclical process where we're driving and engaging people to the site. We're re-engaging them throughout the customer journey in efforts to finally convert them. And then the expand stage is things that we can do within shopping, YouTube, search to reach out to that net new customer. Fill that funnel back up again, because as we all know, search is at times a very limited bucket of users, and we can exhaust that relatively quickly, especially if we have the appetite to grow. So it's very important to look at these three pieces as an integral part of that strategy. So how do we set ourselves up with success? Well, number one, we need to ensure that we need to ensure that we have the right marketing objectives. Number one, what is the objective to your business? Do you intend on getting that net new customer? Do you intend on starting a campaign to help out with customer retention or upselling existing customers? Are you a subscription-based business? All things to consider in terms of a marketing objective. And then a little bit more tactically, what is your objective within AdWords itself? Is it to boost your return on ad spend? Is it to boost your overall conversions or overall revenue? So it's very important to take really one tactical KPI to focus on, because that's going to be your true North Star in terms of daily optimization and everything you do within the platform. So the first piece is to consider your marketing objectives. The second piece is let's ensure that we have proper tracking in place within the website to not only track that conversion, track that revenue, but also to be able to build high quality audience lists that we can then use to leverage within the platform. This is where a lot of people actually make mistakes. They're not building high quality, really ahead of time, they're not building high quality lists to leverage, and that's a chief mistake when you're looking at AdWords today. We want to make sure that we're supplementing everything we do with audiences. Thirdly, we need to make sure that we're adhering to AdWords best practices. So this comes in a few forms. Number one, bidding. We want to make sure, in particular, with everything we do, search, display, there's going to be different strategies that are going to be better fits. However, within display in particular, I really implore you guys to use smart bidding. Smart bidding is going to be able to deliver a lot of the auction time intelligence that you, to be frank, aren't getting within manual CPC. So using smart bidding on top of what you're doing from a display or search standpoint will give you that auction time intelligence to say, is this user a high opportunity for conversion? Have they been to competitor sites, your websites? Are they browsing relevant information? It's going to give you a real leg up in terms of where you place in that auction. So really implore you guys to look at smart bidding in particular for display and search. And then secondly, your budget recommendations. So this is a little bit of a pitfall as well for many advertisers. What I like to give guidance on is to at least set a budget that's 10 times your target cost per acquisition for a campaign to start. The reason for this, especially within our smart bidding technologies, it's going to give you that headroom that the platform needs in order to drive that end conversion. So I would look at setting that budget to at least 10 times your CPA at the start. To give you kind of a leg up there. Thirdly and lastly here in terms of a best practice, in terms of creative, we all know static collateral is great. However, I would really implore you to take a look at responsive advertisements, because not only is it going to reduce the overhead that's required in terms of setting up and going live with the display campaign, but it actually very many times looks better. It can show in more placements. So really dynamic. Take a look at responsive ads, set a few up and test them against your static. I think you might be pleasantly surprised. Secondly, look at your delivery message. We want to make sure that our delivery method is set to standard so that we're serving ads more evenly throughout the day. And then lastly, ad rotation. Again, I think this is a no-brainer, but set it to optimize. It's going to start to use more signals in terms of driving that end conversion or end click. That's going to be helpful in terms of end performance. So let's adhere to those best practices. And then lastly on this slide, to set yourself up, let's make sure that we're choosing the right campaign structure for audience. So what does this mean? Well, in search, this means that you're going to be applying RLSA audiences in a bid-only fashion. We're simply going to be layering in those audiences to see what they perform at, and then we could possibly actually improve the performance overall by leveraging more traffic from them. So for search, implore you to layer those on in a bid-only fashion. And then from a display network perspective, structurally, let's make sure that we're only really applying one form of audience targeting per ad group, because this is going to allow you to tailor your bids appropriately and actually easier to understand and report on performance as well. So either set it up in a new display campaign or set it up in a new ad group, just so we can kind of see an A/B test and see the differences between the different audiences that we set up. So really important, what audience features are we going to implement? What are we going to do next? So let's go through the process, and I alluded to earlier the identify, re-engage, and expand framework. So that first process is, let's identify that audience first. And I mentioned earlier that you can use some subjective inputs firstly when you're thinking about audiences online, but then I would really like you to use some of the AdWords front-end tools to help you supplement that knowledge and possibly discover some things that you normally wouldn't see. So again, consider what you already know, and then supplement that with AdWords data, in particular the Auction Insights report that I mentioned. So you may have seen this before. This is actually, again, in the AdWords front end. Simply go to Shared Library, Audience Manager, then Audience Insights. This is going to be activated for any account that has remarketing lists created, excuse me. You're going to be able to see a lot of different characteristics in terms of what is the makeup of your lists, how can you then take those lists and expand upon that. So for example, within this particular screen, we see that demographics, we see in-market distribution. What are some of the taxonomies that your existing lists would fall into if you decided to, engage and expand upon your current strategy? So it'll give you some ideas in terms of those established taxonomies from in-market to affinity that you can utilize to expand your framework. Again, demographics, location, and devices, all things to know and to take into account, particularly just for overall search optimization. What is the makeup of your audience? If they're a heavy mobile audience, maybe we need to inform some changes to the website in order to be more successful. So take a look at the Audience Insight Report. It can give you some really great starting points in terms of developing that next move in your strategy. So as we spoke of, the identification is very important, but I would say that this is also very crucially important. And as I mentioned, these things are cyclical. It's very, very important that we're re-engaging everyone that we drive to the site. And then from there, after we've exhausted that audience and as we continue to work through that audience, we want to make sure that we're filling the funnel appropriately with that expand type of campaign type, So keep engaging them. Really, really important is that re-engaging is going to yield usually the highest return, that remarketing, the dynamic remarketing, the remarketing list for search ads. It's going to usually give you the highest return out of all these strategies. And it's important to understand kind of the diminishing returns that happen as you expand and as you reach into new users and new markets. And I do want to touch on that in a little bit more detail. So before I do that, I do want to show you, a few products that we offer and how they really play into the strategy. As you can see on the left side, it really is a lot of the re-engaging features or products that we have in the front end. The RLSAs of the world, the display remarketing of the world, the customer match. You can see in the middle that Smart Display, a relatively newer campaign type, reaches all these different types. So it not only re-engages, but it also gets that net new customer. And then on the very, very far right, you'll see some of those expand characteristics or expand levels of targeting. So we see our defined in-market taxonomies. We see our custom intents, which I'm personally a huge fan of, and then our similar audiences as well. So it's important for you to really understand the role that these features play in kind of your overall framework and to be using them selectively. So, hey, I'll give you an example. If your focus is to get as many bottom of the funnel conversions as possible, we're trying to run people through the funnel, we're trying to harvest all that demand, we need to be focusing more on the left side of the slide. If we're continuing to do that, but we say, hey, we have an appetite to grow, well, you may want to consider using some of the in-market or custom intent for YouTube or GDN. So these two sides play an integral role, especially in the middle with Smart Display. There will be, and I'm sure have been covered, Smart Display has been covered in detail, but it's a good middle ground from both of these strategies as kind of an all-inclusive display network approach. Again, capitalizing on the lower funnel as well as the mid funnel to drive end value in the account. So if you haven't used Smart Display, if you're looking for a test and looking to expand a bit, I would really implore you to take a look at that as a test. I would say don't set your starting daily budget less than, I would say, 7 to 8 times your target CPA. The higher you set it, usually the better it works. And it's a great way to expand what you're currently doing from a prospecting standpoint. As I said, there is a trade-off in terms of the products that you're using and what you'll be getting. So CPA versus conversion volume, there's always going to be a little bit of a trade-off there. As you can see on the very left, these are going to be things that are going to be providing the lowest cost per acquisition, whether that be remarketing lists for search, customer match, display remarketing, kind of getting towards the middle of that. And then on the far righter side, we see some of those expand type products. Again, it's going to be very important to set your expectations appropriately. If you're an agency, let your client know that, hey, we're going out and we're prospecting that net new. You may see a cost per acquisition that is a little bit higher than what we see from display remarketing, maybe 50% higher than what we see in search. And I would really implore you to set expectations appropriately, whether you're in-house or at an agency. So, quick example in terms of how these tactics work practically. Well, okay, we take a group of people, we identify them, we drive them to the site using keyword targeting, display network targeting, YouTube, whatever it may be. We make sure to re-engage them, target them appropriately across that journey. And then finally, once they convert and once we get into the expand phase, we need to fill that funnel back up again. We see more visits, we run them through that process again. So again, this is a cyclical process that happens to fill up the funnel and to ultimately harvest that demand. And to expand and to find that net new user, you may be paying a little bit more money overall. But however, that final cost per acquisition is going to remain the same. Very, very important from a measurement perspective, particularly within search, and I've spoken heavily on this before. We want to make sure that we're setting realistic expectations in terms of our targeting, as well as setting the appropriate expectations from an attribution timeline. So we need to get off a last click attribution because, as we all know, that consumer journey is fragmented nowadays. People don't necessarily sit down at the desktop computer and then convert that same moment. So we need to make sure that we're using an attribution model that's holistic, that measures these things appropriately. So if your account is eligible for DDA, or data-driven attribution, that is the most recommended. Google has taken our years and years of machine learning and pattern recognition to create, frankly, one of the most accurate attribution models off of last click. A lot of accounts right now, especially at the smaller level, don't have the option to do data-driven attribution yet. However, if you don't have the option to do that, I would implore you to take a look at some of the other models as well, and I'll discuss that in a second. So, really important, and just to cover data-driven attribution in a little bit more detail, it's going to basically act in the same way. However, over time, the model's going to basically learn your particular account to find out which touch points are the most influential. So it'll take into account, whatever it is, revenue, lead volume, the actual contribution of each of these keywords across the user path. It's going to know and start to learn a little bit more better. Again, tailored to your account in particular. And it's going to learn and get smarter over time. So like every non-last click model, it's going to assign fractional credit for conversions. And that's honestly the best because we can then start to understand and really up-level some of those opportunities that we may not have known in the past. So there could be keywords that you're not optimizing for now that are providing end value at the bottom funnel. So very, very important here. If you can use data-driven attribution, please do. So, we talked really quickly on that search attribution piece, and there's a lot coming down the pipe in terms of looking at the account holistically from YouTube to display to search. So look out for more details there in terms of Google attribution. However, for the moment, it's very important to set expectations appropriately with display because display does play a crucial role in the journey. Even if a user doesn't convert on a display ad, that doesn't mean it didn't have an effect. So that's where obviously view-through conversions come in and are very chief in looking at reporting there. I would really implore you to take a look at, again, responsive ads to boost, number one, that click-through rate and boost that view-through conversion if possible, because we can now show up in a little bit more placement, be a little bit more dynamic with our collateral there. So make sure that you're measuring holistically. View-through conversions and that billboard effect, so to speak, of display network really plays a role in terms of influencing that end customer journey and that end conversion. So make sure you're measuring view-throughs as a part of your overall maintenance, overall optimization, and the tweaks you're making, because a lot of people look at direct conversions and they're missing out on a lot. Lastly, looking at attribution models, and not to confuse anyone, but let's remember that this is only for search now. Make sure you're off of a last click model, and here's a few kind of guidelines to consider, particularly due to business type, that you can look to in terms of setting off, getting off of that last click model. So if you're really looking to grow, if you're new to a market, if you're just starting, you have a longer path to purchase, which is honestly the most influential there. If there's a customer journey at all, we need to be off of a last click model. I would recommend, and my favorite is either position-based or time decay. I do favor kind of the recency there in terms of a time decay attribution. I like having the most recent touch point be the most valued. But take a look, see and kind of ideate internally in terms of what is the best fit for the business, the client's business, and then you can make a decision off of that. But last click is a little short-sighted, and we could be missing out on a lot of value there. So now I talked about a little bit of a framework in terms of how can we begin to approach audience as a strategy? If you're doing something now, how can we actually compound that and do a little bit better? What I want to talk about now is a few things that you can do to actually optimize the campaigns once they're running. And I think this is actually really interesting as well. So as we all know, within the display network, your ad creative and your messaging is frankly, it's key. We need to do better as marketers and advertisers to really step up our creative excellence in terms of, creating ads that are relevant to the individual users, creating ads that are impactful in the moments that they're present in. So really look at your ad creative. To be honest, the world today is so busy and so fragmented that we really don't have time for templated static ads, something that's just really general. If you really want to step your game up from a display network perspective, and frankly, even a YouTube perspective, creative excellence is key. So lean on your partner there from a creative standpoint, because that's a real large lever to success. And then, as I mentioned, rethink your bidding. If you're not getting results from your remarketing campaigns or your overall GDN campaigns, look to test some smart bidding there in terms of how are we going to market? Are we leveraging some of those auction time insights that can help provide a little bit better performance as well? So test that accordingly. What I'll tell you is, allow at least a month or so for a proper test when you're using some of those technologies, and look at year over year, look at period over period, make sure you're measuring it appropriately, and consult some of the resources that we have, whether it's in the Partners Forum or the AdWords Help Center, because there's some really detailed information in terms of measuring and implementing those strategies effectively. Lastly there for bidding, I do want to stress again the CPA expectation that you're looking at. If you're considering taking a broad GDN campaign and you're saying, hey, I'm just not getting the results from this, I want to start testing automated bidding, let's look at the CPAs that remarketing or search is showing, because for the search CPA, you're going to want to at least tack on another 50% on top of that to set it to. If you're looking at remarketing, I would look for about 25 to 30% over that for an overall GDN campaign. So just set the expectation and set your bid appropriately, because that's going to be make or break in terms of the volume that you're going to get and the results that you receive as well. For search in particular, we cover this a little bit, but let's use bid only. Bid only is simply a segmentation mechanism that we layer on audiences to our existing campaigns. From there, we can then accelerate the performance from those audiences possibly to really unlock a lot of value. I've seen cost per acquisition dip 50% overnight using some of these technologies. So if you don't have an all users list at least applied to the campaign, I would implore you to do that. And then this highlights kind of another very important point is, let's make sure to refine our audience lists. Let's get detailed. Let's really dig into the business to say what users are really important to us that are traveling on our site, and how can we really segment out and encourage that traffic from those users moving forward. So that's what RLSA is all about. Take a look at your existing audience strategy to see if it's a good fit and layer those audiences on with a bit adjustment. Again, display ads, let's optimize, let's try responsive ads if you aren't already. The amount of placements that I can showcase in, as well as the look and feel most times, actually provides a little bit better performance as well. So responsive ads are a very neat feature and relatively low from an overhead standpoint. You don't have to lean on a creative partner most times. And to showcase that a little bit more finely, you can see a few examples there from what we put together on wayfair.com. Again, just few short words here. Take a few simple ads, headline, description, a couple images, and an URL, and we're going to create your creative for you. It's going to look professional, and it's going to be able to populate in a lot more placements on the GDN. As we wrap up today, I do want to highlight a few pitfalls, and I mentioned some of these a little bit as well, but I want to make sure I highlight them. So number one pitfall with your audience strategy, unless you have a specific purpose for using target and bid RLSA rather than bid only, I would suggest you don't duplicate campaigns and do that. For those of you that don't know, that target and bid methodology is simply saying to your search campaign, I want to target only the users in this remarketing list. Granted, there are times and a place to do this. However, it's going to severely limit your traffic, and it's really not going to be a beneficial campaign if you're looking to duplicate your existing structure. Layer those audiences on in bid only, and then we can encourage that traffic from those users. So stay away from target and bid unless you have a specific purpose. So thinking about a specific purpose, if I have people that have browsed on a certain part of my website that I'm running a sale on, I can then basically retarget them on a different keyword, a similar keyword, to bring them back to a separate landing page. So think about that, but I would really stay away from target and bid unless you have a specific purpose. That pitfall number two, again, unrealistic target for CPA. Let's make sure that we're using at least 50% over what our search CPA is, and about 25-30% over what our display remarketing campaigns are converting at. And then finally, that third most really frequent pitfall is making changes during a campaign's learning period. Really important, particularly if you're thinking about testing smart display, you need to leave the campaign alone, because if you do make changes within that first 1, 2, 3 weeks that are really drastically impacting it, the system has to go back and relearn. We're starting from square one. So this applies not only to smart display, but to some of the other automated bidding technologies that we do have. So I would implore you to reach out to your Google representative or the help center to try to understand a little bit more. What can you do? What can't you do? Again, really look for in that first 1 to 2.5 to 3 weeks. Make sure that you're not making crucial changes to a campaign, because it's going to affect overall performance in the long term. So this is one of my favorite topics. I love speaking on audience because it's something that you can really action overnight. It's something that provides a huge uplift in terms of conversion values, in terms of cost per acquisition. So there's really no need to wait on this stuff. We can start today, and it's only going to start to get better over time. So I hope that a lot of this information was impactful for you. I want you to really take away that framework that I was discussing in terms of identifying the audience, re-engaging them with the right messaging at the right time to ultimately convert them. And then once we've exhausted that, or once we're churning through that process, what audiences that are relevant can we expand to? Is there a relevant in-market audience? These users are actively looking for your product or service. There's a lot that you can do to fill that funnel. I hope today helped. And I do want to take a few questions here towards the tail end of our session. And I hope to help. So let me go ahead and log on here. So what is the best practice for custom intent setup on GDN? That's a great question. Custom intent is a relatively new product that's come out, particularly for GDN, and it's also come available here very shortly for YouTube. Custom intent is basically, I like to characterize it as really understanding users that are in market for a product or service, but you're actually going to be able to define that audience yourself. So in terms of best practices for setting up that audience, I would say 15 to 20 high converting keywords as well as URLs within the setup. What I like to tell clients is that use URLs that are competitor URLs, but very, very specific. So if there are particular product pages from a competitor that you're looking at, or even pages from a supplementary service or product, add those in as well. Have an entire audience that's made up of just high converting keywords as well. So be creative, layer in URLs and high converting keywords within the account depending on the focus. Again, be creative, create multiple audiences, create 4 or 5 custom intent audiences and test them against each other. See what works best. That's what I really like about that new solution, is that we can start to define these audiences ourselves. Be wary about making that a little too specific. Sometimes it'll show you suggestions in terms of keywords that you should add. Probably take them up a lot of the times on the suggestions that populate in the platform, because that's going to help with overall reach. So how can customer match be enhanced by audience targeting? A few more examples there. Customer match is a great product. For the moment, it's not available on GDN, but we can look at it for YouTube, Gmail, and search as well. So customer match you can then layer on from an RLSA standpoint to your search ads. You can start to look at Gmail targeting as well, which is really impactful. Be enhanced by audience targeting. I would really be wary of adding multiple layers to what you're doing in terms of really decreasing your reach. So if you're doing a Gmail campaign, I would really be wary of using audience to say, hey, I only want to target people 36 years of age and older and who are just male. I would be wary of just, don't add on those extra qualifiers, because it's going to drastically decrease your reach, and frankly, in some cases, it may not even serve. So that is one of the pitfalls that I see with customer match, is people being a little too picky in terms of setting up the campaign. But I love customer match as a solution. Coming to GDN soon, as I spoke on, I think that's going to be big. Just make sure that your lists are high quality for customer match. I think that's one of the pitfalls that we see as well, is that, from the customers that we are uploading, are these, do you have prospects? Are these prospects? Are these converted customers? Because you can then start layering on those different kind of segments of customers to see what performs better and what has a little bit more scale. So, don't lump everything into one list and start to apply it, but rather segment the list if you can, if the size is large enough, to get a little bit more specific there. Great question. My remarketing lists are too small. What can I do? That is a common problem that we see, especially with SMBs. If your remarketing list is too small, there's a couple things you can do. So number one, increase the audience duration or audience membership duration from that list in total. So if your duration is now set to 30 days, these individuals and users are just going to be lumped there for 30 days and then they'll drop off. I would maybe consider opening that up to a larger window, depending on what fits your business. Maybe 180, maybe 360 days, if it's really, really applicable. But that's something that you can do to grow the overall size. Something else I would do is to lean on the expand framework and the expand part of that framework. Add new users that are in market. Add new users from a custom intent audiences into that bucket. Or if you're using a different platform, add those users into that bucket as well. So there's a lot that you can do to kind of synthesize that membership, but if you're not in the mood to expand at this point in time, I would really look for you to try to grow that membership window as best possible. For custom affinity and custom intent, do you want to focus on just the domains, or does Google pay attention to the content on deep URLs? So custom intent, again, Be specific with your URLs. If you're finding that the reach is too small, if you're not getting traffic from that custom intent or custom affinity audience, you may want to look to open it up to just the domain level. Again, play around with it. It's something that you're going to have to experiment with a little bit, but I recommend to get as specific as possible, maybe a category on a website or a subcategory possibly, product pages if you deem appropriate, but get creative. Again, and if it doesn't start to serve or you're needing more reach, you may want to start to broaden that targeting. With that, I would really implore you to make sure you're segmenting the audiences appropriately from an ad group and a campaign perspective, because you can then lever and see performance a little bit more finely, as I spoke on. So that's a big key there. How does audience targeting jive with the new YouTube format, TrueView for Action? So audience targeting jives very well with it. We can utilize most of the features that I spoke on to target individuals on YouTube. YouTube for Action, TrueView for Action, is actually, I think, going to be a game changer in terms of driving that direct conversion from a sight and sound perspective on YouTube. YouTube for Action is going to be basically providing you a lot more functionality from a call to action perspective, featuring products if you're an e-commerce business, a lot more functionality coming down the pipe there. So yeah, I mean, audience targeting jives with it very well, just depending on how you want to segment the audiences, what you're going for. Reach out to your agency or reach out to internally and brainstorm and kind of what audiences you want to go after, but you should be fine there. Apply those audiences away. I think we'll have time for one more question. This is a really good one. When would an advertiser begin with an expand strategy as compared to a re-engage strategy? That's a good question. So if you'll remember, re-engaging is people that we've driven before. We're touching them again in the right moments. When would we start with an expand? When would we start with that net new approach? Well, that's going to be really dependent on the size of their remarketing lists. Are their remarketing lists too small to even re-engage people? Well, we're going to start to need to fill that funnel a little bit. We're going to need to start to fill those buckets. So using expand to do that, to fill those buckets, is impactful. If a company is kind of brand new on the scene and they're looking to really get that reach, really expand fast, draw awareness, start with that expand strategy mainly, with that re-engaging kind of lagging behind it or running alongside it. So start with expand if you really can't have anything to work with the re-engage bucket. So I hope today was helpful. Again, I love speaking about this. If you have any questions, I implore you to take a look at our help center, our forum, reach out to your Google representative. It's been really great talking with you. Again, my name is Josh Wilner. Have a great day.